Hello and welcome to Jerry's Live. My name is Michaela Westra and I'm going to be your host today. And before we jump into this super fun lesson, today's class code is going to be JL340. If you pop that in the search bar on JerrysArtarama.com, you'll find everything that we are using today. Now, this is Introduction to Encaustics Part 2. So if you did not check out Part 1, check that out later tonight. Stay here and watch us live, and then catch up on the other one later on. But so we are going to actually just jump into encaustic painting today. So I am going to be painting these lovely flowers, and I really love Black-Eyed Susans. Those are my favorite flowers. These are not Black-Eyed Susans, but they kind of look like Black-Eyed Susans, so that's why I chose this picture. And jumping right on in, I already have all of my encaustic wax melted on my palette, and I have my wood panel already primed with 2 coats of just plain wax medium. If you are following along, you do not have to add those 2 coats first if you want to jump in and work with me step by step. The only difference is going to be your erasability. If you start off without a coat or 2 of wax first, you won't be able to scrape off that layer as well because that pigment is going to soak into the wood. So if you do have something you want to like redo, just put another layer of wax on top of it. So jumping in, I have the same materials I used for Part 1. But in case you were not here, I'm going to start off with my natural bristle, Chunking Hog Imperial Bristle. This is a flat 8. And I'm going to warm it up on my palette because as that wax cools down, it is going to harden. So I'm going to soften up my bristles by getting them nice and warm. And while I do that, I'm also going to pop up here few of my other brushes. I have my 1.5" Hake brush, and I have another Imperial bristle brush that's going to be a flat 2. But I like to just hold it on the griddle here and slowly bend my bristles until I can bend them all the way. That's how I know that my bristles have gotten soft. So I am actually going to start with a background color. And for this image, my background color, I'm going to start with a green, but I kind of want a different variation of greens going on in the background. So I'm going to start with a teal, and I have a nice big container here filled with that nice teal color. And I'm going to go ahead and just cover the whole thing with this teal color. And you can absolutely use, I have this 3-inch Hake brush, and you can go in there and have this one layer on there in 2 seconds. But I kind of like a little bit of variation in my first layer. So if you do it this way and you add it in tiny little brush strokes, you're going to have a less solid colored background. And I like that variation, especially with something naturalistic like these flowers here. I'm going to try and not overlap previous brush strokes because I do want to fuse every layer that I put on here. And if I'm overlapping 2 different brush strokes, you're going to have to heat that one layer a little bit longer for it to fuse to that first clear layer. You have a question already?
Is the color you're using, is that a straight color that you can buy, or is that a color you mix?
Yes, it is. So this is actually from our wax snaps, the Encausticos. This is the Cobalt Teal Green. And I just snap these off, pop them in the little tray that I have here, which are the R&F Heavy Duty palette cups. I love these so much because they are not a muffin tin, which is what I'm used to using. And these are amazing because they're separate and I can move them around my palette. I can reorganize my rainbow that I have up there. Beautiful. But yes, this is already pre-made color. I don't have to mix this, which is also great for large areas of color. You don't have to try and mix this color again. Oops. And my griddle likes to do this thing where it likes to save energy and power down occasionally. So I'm actually using the hot surface to keep my paint warm as it's going through that cool down phase.
Would it help to warm your surface before you start to paint on it, or is that not necessary?
It's not necessary, but it definitely does help for smooth brush strokes. I'm not too worried about it right now because I want that variated or a textured background. It's not going to be physically textured, but the color is going to look textured.
Also, you mentioned earlier that you used to use muffin pans.
Mm-hmm.
If you use a muffin pan for encaustic paint, can you cook with it again?
No. If you use anything that comes from the kitchen, do not use it again in the kitchen. It is now solely an art supply. No longer food safe. Another question?
Yeah, can you clean out the palette pans and reuse them for another color? And then what's the easiest way to do that?
So I like to empty out the paint while it is hot, and I will wipe it off with a rag until it is completely empty. And if it starts to cool down while you're wiping it off, use a heat gun to keep it hot, and you can completely clear it out. Again, you can use our soy wax or our slick wax, which is from our introductory set for Encausticos, to really clean that out if you're switching from two very different colors, like from a yellow or a black to a yellow, if you don't want any color transfer. But it's pretty easy to switch those out if you need to.
Did you layer medium on the board first? We had a viewer that came in a little late and wanted to know.
Sure, yeah, I started with 2 layers of just encaustic wax medium. So that's just going to be the Damar resin and that beeswax. And the reason I did that beforehand is, 1, to kind of save up on time, and 2, because I only have limited space on my palette right now, and I have just a small little container from the Encausticos introductory set. But I do have like another big pan where I have like my own handmade mixture where I can use for really big areas of just that wax medium. And I am just fusing that first layer of that teal, cobalt teal green into that wax medium. And I'm just following that shiny surface. I like to melt it until I get rid of those brush strokes, and it will mix with that clear medium underneath. I don't want to hold it in one spot for too long, because then that will push that top layer of pigmented wax out of the way and expose just that clear medium. And since I am doing it to the point where I'm removing that textured surface, it does take a little bit longer. You don't necessarily need to take quite as long if you don't want to. As soon as it turns glossy, it is fused. But I am fusing and kind of creating a different surface texture as I'm going. So it's taking just a little bit longer.
Would you have to do this step if you didn't start with the 2 layers underneath?
Yes, so I still like to kind of fuse it into the surface even if I don't have those first 2 layers. That really helps with securing it to your panel. Another question?
So why would you choose to use encaustics over, say, acrylics or oils or watercolors?
A couple of reasons. 1, the light fast on encaustic is incredible. There is no color shift. It will not darken or lighten over time. It is also extremely archival. The longest or the oldest piece that is still intact today is from the 1st century. and it's still completely intact. Color is still beautiful. These last a long time because they are waterproof. They're light fast. If they're in the right like temperature, they're gonna last a really, really long time. But now that I have this first layer on here, I'm waiting for it to kind of cool down. Doesn't take too long. It's still going to be warm, but it's going to no longer be liquid. So once it's at that point, I'm ready for the next step. If it's still warm, that is good for that brushability. Like we said, heating the surface beforehand, it is good to keep it kind of warm as you're going. So I'm actually going to start mixing some colors. And I'm gonna go for a really dark green. So I'm gonna add some of this teal. I have a really nice dark blue, and that is again from this introductory set. That's going to be the ultramarine blue. And I'm also gonna add some of that bismuth yellow. Another question? No? Oh, okay, sorry. Thought I saw a hand. All right. And this is a nice green. I'm actually gonna keep this for my second green, but I'm gonna still go for a dark green. And I'm just kind of dipping into my wells of encaustic and mixing everything straight on my griddle here.
Can you pull the griddle down just a tiny bit?
Yeah, of course. Can we see our colors?
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Can you remind us the wax binder that's in these paints?
Yes, so this is going to be beeswax and Damar resin. I'm gonna add a little bit more blue to that. And I'm just following my reference photo here. I'm going to start with just the background. I'm going to do everything except for these bright yellow flowers. I want those to be kind of on top. So I'm gonna start by laying down where I see those really dark green areas. And I'm going to slowly build up these layers. I'm not going to worry about if there's going to be a flower there because everything I put on here is going to sit on top of what I did before.
When you dipped into yellow, we noticed on Facebook that it didn't pollute the color. Is that common that it wouldn't pollute the color?
I would say yes. I just dipped it in there really quick. I would recommend if you want to keep your pools of wax super vibrant and the original color, clean your brush in between grabbing new colors. I like working quickly, and I know that I have more fresh yellow that I can add to it. So I'm not too worried about it, but if you want to make sure those colors are clear, I would be more careful.
Can you remind us what you use to clean your brush?
So I used the slick wax or the soy wax. That is going to be from the introductory set for the Encausticos. They also sell it separately if you want just that slick wax. They have it in different size options if you want quite a bit of it. But I am almost done with this dark green.
And how would you smooth the surface if you wanted to?
There are going to be a couple different options for you. You can use, they make an iron where you can iron your surface back into a smooth surface. Frida, would you be willing to check our website for that encaustic iron? Thank you. Or as you are smoothing things out, you can use one of these pottery trimming tools to smooth off the surface, scrape it flat, and then fuse it back into like a waxy smooth surface. So there are a couple of options depending on if you want to preserve something on the surface or not. So I'm going to go ahead and fuse this again. Again, I'm going to fuse every single layer. If I put something on top of it, I want to make sure it is fused to the layer underneath first, especially if I'm going for something more realistic. Because in order to fuse it, if there's multiple layers that you're fusing at once, you may have to melt the top surface in order to get to the lower surfaces. And you don't want to obliterate what you just put on there. Unless you do. I don't know, it depends on what you're painting. But again, I'm just kind of following that shininess. Once it has turned shiny, it has fused. I like to remove those brush strokes, but if you like that texture, it can definitely add a lot of character to your painting. Now, my plan for this is I'm going to do the entire background, and then I'm going to put a coat of just plain wax medium that is going to soften everything out and push it into the background before I add those yellow flowers. So it'll kind of create some dimension into the painting. Go ahead and put in the chat. I'm curious who is here from last week. Who watched us last week and was anxiously waiting for this step of the introduction of Encaustic. Alright, I'm now going to go in with a smaller brush. And I have this other nice light green that I made earlier. And I'm going to go in and find those lighter green sections in my painting. So these other little leaves here, I'm going to be a little bit more purposeful with my brush strokes now, because this is going to be something that I'm going to see through at the final image. Again, you can always carve out the shape that you create. If you don't quite like your shape, you can carve it back into the shape that you want. You can paint over it. So it's not the end of the world if you do something that you're not a fan of. But again, I do like to work fairly quickly so I can do those longer brush strokes. And I'm going to kind of mark out where this other little stem is, even though this is in the foreground. It'll be a little bit easier for me to figure out where that is if I have it marked out, since I'm using this color already.
We've got several that are joining us from last week.
Yay! Welcome back!
Why would you use a soy wax to clean your brushes instead of a solvent?
Because this is different than a different medium. So this is not going to be oil paint. The soy wax is going to act like a solvent. It is going to be a softer wax that still is able to work with the wax that you're using. So that's why we use it, is to clean off your brushes. It's still going to be a wax-based medium that's going to work well with your encaustic, and it's going to be softer so that it can remove that pigment from your bristles. Solvents, like oil solvents, are not going to be compatible with your encaustics. So I'm actually going to make one more green. I like to kind of group my colors into threes, so like a dark, medium, and a light. So I'm going to go back on top of my lighter greens and just give them a little bit of a highlight on some of them. And I should have fused before I did this, but that's okay. We live and we learn. I get very excited sometimes that I forget about the important things. But this is still going to be a background part of the image, so that's okay if I have to melt it a little bit to get it to fuse to those other layers. But again, we're looking for that shine as we fuse. I'm going to fuse a little bit longer on these doubled up layers just to make sure that both those layers are fused to that other one beneath. And that's going to be all I do for that background green area, and I'm going to jump into those flowers next. And this reference photo is really great for kind of creating a separation between foreground and background, because all of the flowers in the background are red and orange, while the flowers in the foreground are yellow. So I'm not going to use any yellow for these flowers I add in that are in the background. Alright. And I'm going to again start at my darkest color and build up to a lighter color. And I'm going to start with my bigger brush. And since I have green on there, I'm going to clean it off while it is hot. I'm going to wipe it off on a rag. Dip into my soy wax, scrub till it comes out clear, wipe it off on my rag again, and we are clean and flexible. So I'm going to start with a kind of a deep red. So I'm actually going to start with this purple I have on the end here, act as my shaded red area. So anywhere I have a dark red flower, like in this corner here, I'm going to start using my brush to create those petals. And something that just happened here is I pressed down really hard with that paint and kind of pulled up the warm wax underneath. So be careful if you're working hot on warm that you don't press too hard and kind of disturb the layer underneath. So I'm just working one petal at a time because my brush is making the perfect strokes, and I'm kind of making up what is underneath my yellow flowers so I don't just kind of end off randomly and then don't have anything in that area if my yellow flower does not end up exactly where I planned. So I have a flower here that's kind of dark. I'm just using this to find all those dark areas on my flowers. Down here. Do we have anyone painting along? Oh, I will say, I just remembered, the reason that we know that these last so long and all the way back to the 1st century is thanks to a very specific place in Egypt. I'm spitting out some fun facts. They're called the Fayum burial portraits. If you know Encaustic, you've probably heard of these portraits. But they are portraits that are done in Encaustic on thin wood pallets that are placed on mummies. They put the wood panels of the portrait on the face and use the gauze to wrap around the edges so it looks like a window into the person that was there. They're absolutely stunning. If you find them in person, let me know. I've been wanting to see them in person for so long. So if you know of a museum that has them, please share that in the chat. You will make me a very happy person. All right, I'm now gonna jump into just plain red. This red is also part of that introductory kit. That's going to be a Naphthol red. And I'm not cleaning off my brush just because it's going to give a little bit of a different red. Kind of an earthy red. I can always go back in with that pure red on top if I want. Again, having those variations of color on that one subject creates that depth that you're looking for. And now that I have one of the main colors of the flower, I can go ahead and build the entirety of the rest of these flowers. Because with that purple, I kind of put in a little bit here and a little bit there. So I didn't have too much of that purple on there.
Do you have to worry about breathing this in?
Ventilation is key. When working with encaustic, ventilation is important. The only thing that I would worry about is if you raise the temperature above the recommended temperature, which is going to be about 200 degrees, you will start to get fumes, so that wax is melting and burning on the surface. Those are the fumes you want to look out for. But if you have ventilation and you keep it at the perfect temperature, you shouldn't have to worry about it at all.
And then is the general rule with encaustics that you want to work from dark to light, or is there like a practice that you would follow?
Not really. This is mostly just my process that I like to work with. It's such a flexible medium with how you work with it, that this type of process isn't really necessary. All right, and I'm trying to make sure I cover up that teal. And if I don't, I'll probably go back to my dark green and kind of cover that up.
Can you remind me what size this panel is?
Yes, this is going to be a 6 by 12. I absolutely love these long and skinny orientations now. I don't know why I didn't use it more often. Especially with, if you guys haven't checked out some of our fun New York Central watercolor papers. I absolutely love those long and skinny blocks that they have. That's what got me into this. All right. I'm gonna go into my orange next. Let me fuse this layer. And I'm keeping my brushes on the griddle so that I can keep those bristles soft as I'm working. That way I can pick up whatever brush I want to use next without worrying about it being hard or having to wait to warm those bristles up again. And since they are natural bristle, they're not going to melt. I won't have to worry about that. Again, I'm looking for that shine as I go. I don't want to hold this in one spot for too long. Also, I like to typically hold it further away, but I'm going a little bit faster by holding it closer. So after this color, I went in with 2 different shades of orange. But in order to kind of speed through this painting, I have prepared part of this ahead of time. So I'm actually going to switch this out. I went through with 2 more shades of orange to build up those beautiful flowers. Made sure to cover up that teal. And then I put those 2 coats of that wax medium on top that I mentioned earlier. That is going to push this into the background and kind of separate the foreground and the background. But for those foreground flowers, I made stencils. So if you were here last week, there are a few different techniques that I covered. We talked about accretion, which is that fun, bubbly texture that we made. We talked about line making, mark making, and stencils. And we talked about embedding. I'm going to do all of those except for embedding today. I might throw in a leaf because I have a leaf from last week, just so we can use all of those techniques. But we'll wait a little bit for that. But we're going to start with stencils, and I did this ahead of time because cutting these flowers out takes a little bit of time. And I just used this white tape, just like we had from last week, blocking out the area, cutting out what I want that stencil to be, so I can have that really nice crispy edge for these flowers. All right, I'm also going to clean off my brushes and my palette because I'm going to go for some yellow, and I want no color contamination for that. And I know there was a question last week if you can save the wax that is on your palette instead of wiping it off. You absolutely can. If you let this cool, you can snap that off the surface, add it into your pans, and melt it back into your color later. And again, cleaning those brushes while it's hot, wipe it off, use that slick wax. You have a question?
We've got a couple.
Okay.
Number 1, how long should you normally wait between applying layers?
It depends on what you're doing. You don't have to wait too long. If you're heavy-handed like I am sometimes, you might want to wait a little bit longer just so that warm layer can kind of harden a little bit longer, so that if you're pressing into the surface, you don't disrupt that previous layer. But typically you don't have to wait very long.
And as a follow-up to that, can you go back and add more layers on a painting that you did several months ago?
You can. You'll definitely want to warm it up beforehand because it's had quite a bit of time to harden. I've definitely done that, but definitely warm it up beforehand before using it, just so that it's ready to be worked with again. Those are all cleaned up. Now I'm going to go in with some base yellow, and I'm going to be kind of orangey with it because, again, I want to do dark to light for this painting. I'm going to start with that darkest yellow in there, which is kind of orange. And I'm going to add these marks inside the flower after, so I want that to stand out. But starting with that orange, I'm going to find wherever that is in my flower.
If you had an older painting that you were adding to, how would you warm it up?
I would either hold a heat gun over it, far away, low setting, just to kind of warm it up, or depending on the panel that you're using, you can place it on the griddle and it will warm it from underneath. Trying to think if there's another way. You can put it in a warm windowsill for a little bit. You have a couple of options.
Ugh.
Oh yeah. If it's 90 something degrees out by you right now, just put it outside for like 2 seconds. Alright. And then again, before I add this next color, going to fuse my layer. And when you're working with stencils that are very specific shape like this, I like to brush from outside of the stencil in, just so I don't have any wax pushed underneath the tape. So I'm going to go in with just the straight yellow and add it into what I had before. And add this, again working outside of my stencil, pulling it in. And I am going to add more layers on top of this, so I'm not too worried about being opaque with this. I'm also making sure my brush strokes go in the direction of my petals that I'm making. It's pretty dark down here, but we'll add some of that in. Darken it up later. Grab a little bit more. But I am glad that I'm able to show you guys that encaustic can be more than something that is abstract, because that's what I see a lot today, and they are absolutely beautiful. But I want people to know that there are a lot of options with this medium. I'm gonna scooch this over. And another fun fact, this was the first medium for easel painting. So prior to that, it was painting on things that were not portable, so painting on walls, furniture, architecture. This was the first medium where they could take it with them places. They could put it on things that moved. And this medium kind of disappeared for a while. And I believe one of the first artists that kind of brought it back to life was Jasper Johns. He's one of the artists that was well known for using encaustic. Alright. I'm thinking maybe we should add something else that's kind of fun to this painting that's not in the reference photo, like a ladybug or something. Can I count on the chat to recommend something to add? I feel like I can. I am going to move to a smaller brush because I'm getting down to some more detailed areas. This one's already clean and ready to go. Going for my really light section now. Make sure I don't have too much paint. The white is what I want to keep as pure as possible. So I like to kind of scrape off any excess paint before grabbing some of that. And just like I did with the leaves in the background, I'm going to lean into my brush strokes to make those petals. Making sure I'm purposeful with the direction I paint these on as well. And this flower isn't quite as light, but I'm going to add some of that in here.
YouTube has suggested a butterfly, a ladybug, or 2 votes for a dragonfly.
Ooh.
Facebook has also suggested butterfly.
Caterpillar.
Caterpillar? Oh man.
Well, you have
Now I have
pretty
too many options.
iridescents.
Oh yeah.
Those pretty shiny metallics.
You know what? We had 2 votes for dragonfly. So I think we're going to go for dragonfly. And I will use those iridescents for my lovely Frida. I love watching these layers come together. And I want to make sure that my paint is really warm when I'm doing something like this, because I want those brush strokes to kind of go for a while. And the hotter that is, the longer that brush stroke is going to last. Let's make sure we add in the center of those flowers. That's where I was planning on using that accretion, because the center of those flowers are already kind of bumpy, and using that accretion is already going to add that texture. So let's go ahead and add those. I'm going to start with a base color. I'm going to go for kind of a brown. Just gonna mix all my colors together. The purple, add some of that yellow in there. Little orange, gonna add some blue. All right. And I like to start with kind of a base color to build that accretion on top of, just because once I add that accretion, it's going to turn into little spots, and I want whatever's in between those spots to be a purposeful color. Since it's really dark down here, I'm going to add quite a bit of this brown. Okay, so now going in for some accretion. Again, that is just layered dry brushing. So I'm just going to go in here. I wiped off a majority of that paint. I'm going to start adding some texture by slowly layering that on. And if the last color that you put on is lighter, you can definitely see that accretion more, especially if you're not adding so much to the point where you're creating like real depth.
Can you remind us about accretion?
Yes. So accretion is a technique where if you have wax on your brush, not a lot, I'm scraping off my excess, and you're very lightly painting onto the surface, you're going to start creating some texture. And the more you layer that texture, that light brush stroking, that dry brushing, is going to eventually only stick to the raised areas. And the more and more you add, the more that texture is going to start building up. So again, I'm just dry brushing to get some texture. I'm actually going to tap it on to add actual texture instead of that dry brushing, just so I can speed up the process a little bit. If you already have a raised surface or a textured surface, that accretion builds up a lot faster than when you start with a flat surface. And I've just been adding blue to my mixture as I went, since that is a really nice dark color and it contrasts very well. But since it is such a long process and I have quite a bit more I want to add before the end of the show, I'm going to add that final layer now. I'm going to go for this nice light yellow because that's where these little spots are popping in. So very light brushing. It should only start attaching to that texture I've created. And I'm just doing it to the top of this area that I've made with these dark colors. This flower down here doesn't need it. I do need to start fusing. The accretion is something you don't fuse in order to maintain that texture as you're going. But now that I've finished, I've already created that texture with the accretion. I just want to make sure it sets a little bit. I'm not going to fuse it too long. I just want to make sure that those layers that I've added fuse together amongst themselves. So just barely going until I see just the start of a shine, and then I'm moving away. Down here I am going to fuse a little bit longer because I didn't want to create much of accretion. I wanted to make some shadows down here. But we've done accretion, we've done stenciling. I'm going to go for some mark making. I have my handy dandy needle tool here from my pottery kit. And I wanted to mostly use this to separate these two flowers here where I wasn't able to create a stencil between them. So just using what I've already created here, I'm going to draw out these petals. And typically, I like to let my layers cool to the point where they're no longer warm before I start carving into the surface, just so it's not too soft. But again, I'm trying to go a little bit faster with this one so I can show you as much as possible. So anywhere there's a need for separation between my petals, I'm going to go in and add some line work. And I don't know if you guys can see, I'm grabbing the extra wax off the tip of my needle tool as I'm going. All right. And you can leave these lines as they are because what's coming through those lines is already pretty dark. I did want to fill them, but my paint is not up here anymore. Can you grab that burnt sienna for me? Thank y'all. There are more than just the ways to fill them than I showed last week. You can also fill them with just more encaustic wax. It does take a little bit longer. You will carve the lines, take some really nice molten hot wax and tap it into that line. And then once it is cooled and no longer warm, you can scrape off that surface and whatever went into those lines will remain. So I am just going to take some of this paint. I'm going to put it straight onto my rag here. And anywhere I see those lines, I'm going to fill them in and buff off the surface. Another fun part about this is if you want to go for a kind of rustic look and you already have those brush strokes from your previous layers, this will fit into those strokes and create more of those dark lines or whatever color you're having in those or in that paint that you have. You can use linseed oil to further remove this paint. It's not going to disrupt your wax that much. I'm actually going to use that. And the oil paint won't disrupt it either. I actually have made my own encaustic with oil paint as my pigment. So using that oil will help remove it from the surface. I love that it's kind of going into those brush strokes that I added. And then before I add that dragonfly, which is going to be a very quick dragonfly because we are getting really close to the end already today, I'm going to add some green to my stems, which is the only thing I have not filled in yet. I'm going to go for my smaller brush here. I already have blue next to yellow, so I'm just going to mix those together and fill in where my stems are. And again, like I said last week, you don't have to wait very long for this paint to harden, so you can remove this tape fairly quickly after you finish painting in your stencil. So let me set that green in there. We'll peel it off and add a dragonfly.
While you're adding the dragonfly, can you discuss how to finish an encaustic painting? I know we touched on it last week, but we have some questions about if there's any specific sealants you use or that kind of thing.
You don't really have to seal it. If you want to put a final coat of encaustic wax on there, you can. But once you're done painting, you're done. It's already protecting itself. So you don't really have to do anything for that final step. If you want to finish off your edges, you absolutely can. I know if you don't tape off your edges, you can take this pottery trimmer tool, scrape off any excess drips from the side. But once you're done painting, you can be done with your painting. Let's go ahead and do some satisfying, hopefully satisfying tape peels. I'd say that's pretty satisfying. And I mentioned last week that if you fuse your stencil with the tape still on there, that it can kind of leave a tapey texture. It's very subtle, but I'll show you in the dynamic camera here what that looks like. If you can see it. So you can kind of see maybe a little bit of the outline of where that tape was. And to get rid of that, I just go over top of it with that heat gun and just smooth out that surface using the heat. It is good to remember where your stencil is if you have really tiny pieces, because they can disappear into your painting if you forget where they are. Again, it's not going to ruin your image, but it could add to your image if it is removed. I have forgotten little pieces of tape more than once. And I used really thin tape for this part of the stencil. Not sure where my brain was at for that part. But it does the same thing, takes a little bit longer to remove.
It is so satisfying.
I love seeing those crisp edges with the stencils. Oh, they're so sexy.
I love everything about this painting. The colors, it's so autumnal, and I love it.
Yes. I could really go for some fall weather right now.
Right?
It is way too hot for me here. And this needle tool is super duper handy dandy when it comes to removing stencils, because they can be hard to take off sometimes. Alright, where are we thinking we want to put this dragonfly real quick?
Top right.
Top right? Right up here?
See the bottom one.
The bottom middle.
This one here?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, I think I like that. Now, the real challenge is, do I remember what a dragonfly looks like?
I knew that's where you were going to go.
It's a stick with,
It's a long shiny stick with tiny shiny wings.
yep.
4 little wings.
Alright, so we have some metallic options. I'm feeling the copper, but that's because I always go for copper. And then we have this nice gold. We have more of a warm gold in here. I think I'm going to go for the copper. No, I'm going to go for the gold. And again, these are the hot sticks. I literally just swirl them around on the griddle to melt them. I am going to add a little bit of yellow to this so that it's a little bit more of a yellow gold. And I'm going to clean this off too because there's some green on here. You will go through rags very quickly, just so you know, because they will harden into their own little rock. I like to use paper towels just because you can toss them. Thank you! Dragonfly! That's what it looks like. Okay. Alright, let's add some yellow to this. Get some nice yellow gold. Alright, I'm going to do some gold wings, I think. I got 2 wings and a long body and a big head. So I think if I get those 3 things, it'll look like a dragonfly. I'm actually going to do a different metallic color for the body. I have this nice red metallic. I want to keep him all metallic, I think. So just real quick, And if your brush strokes aren't kind of brush stroking, make sure you're super hot. So I'm keeping my brush on here for a little while to keep the bristles warm, so I can pull a nice long brush stroke. Alright, I think I need to fix up my wings. But once I finish up this dragonfly, we are done for the day. Thank you guys so much for joining me today. I'm so glad that you guys are checking out my absolute favorite medium with me. He's fine. He's fine. Let's go ahead and heat set him in and call him good. If I had more time, I'd make an absolutely handsome dragonfly for you. But if you have any final questions for me about Encaustic, now is the time. And here is our final image. I'll probably do more to my dragonfly after. He's kind of hidden in there. Yes, question.
If you wanted some sharper details, could you use oil paint or other mediums on top of the encaustics?
I don't think that oil paint will stick to the surface. Oil paint is really best in a mixture of encaustic to change the color or to fill in any cracks and crevices. Painting on the surface of encaustic, I don't know how well that adhesion will be.
We do sell some tools, though, that include different points that are hot tools
Yes.
for using with encaustics that include
Absolutely.
pen nibs.
Yeah, so you can have like pen nib for your encaustic. They make hot brushes so that you can work with a brush that keeps your wax hot the entire time you're painting. There are so many options that you can look for. One more?
How does it look when you buff the
Yeah.
painting?
So once you buff it, it will give it a shine. I don't know. I might be able to do it on this corner here. Let me clean off my hands because I still have some.
Do it on the first one, the half-done one.
Okay,
That should be cool, right?
let's check. Yeah. Clean off my hands. But as I'm doing this, just a reminder, if you want to check out our Facebook group, go ahead and make sure you answer that one security question and join our absolutely lovely community. You can use a microfiber rag to buff these out. You can use tights, nylons. That works really well. I'm going to use this, and then I'm going to use my fingers so you can maybe see a difference. I don't know. They both do about the same thing. But really light pressure on the very top of a smooth, cool encaustic panel will create that nice shine if you want to finish it up with a shiny surface. Again, you can use your finger as well. To also shine up that surface. But thank you guys for coming. That is the end of the show today. Again, our class code for today's class is JL340. And please join us next week. We have Emmy on, and she's going to show you some absolutely beautiful gnarled tree paintings in oil. So definitely join her and check that out. But we will see you next week. And thank you so much for coming. Bye.